Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a forensic file on one of the most persistent and frankly terrifying fears in finance. We're talking about the state seizure of private wealth. And we are starting not with some abstract theory, but with a date that is burned into the memory of anyone who studies wealth protection.
That date is April 5th, 1933. It's the day the U.S. government, by presidential decree, just fundamentally redefined property rights.
Yeah.
It criminalized wealth.
Okay, so let's unpack this historical trauma, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
We're talking about Executive Order 6102. It must have hit the front pages like an absolute earthquake. This wasn't just a tax. It was a government mandate forcing citizens to surrender their most reliable, most portable store of wealth, gold,
Right.
all in exchange for paper money. It turned your personal savings into contraband, literally overnight.
And the mechanism was, it was brutal. FDR signed Order 6102, and it's specifically targeted hoarded gold. So gold coin, gold bullion, gold certificates. The order required Americans to turn these assets in to the Federal Reserve. And the cost of resistance, it wasn't a fine, it was criminal prosecution.
How bad?
Up to 10 years in federal prison.
10 years.
10 years, just for holding on to what you earned.
That trauma, the knowledge that the government can, with just the stroke of a pen, invalidate your savings, that lingers. And while, the average person might dismiss this as ancient history.
It could never happen again.
Right. But smart money, they recognize it as the single most critical legal precedent for government overreach in modern financial times. It's the skeleton key they used once.
Yeah.
And they kept it.
And what's fascinating here is how that legal authority was even established. It proved that during a severe financial crisis, and the Great Depression was the ultimate example, the executive branch could invoke emergency powers. Powers to secure assets it deemed necessary to stabilize the national economy. It was a playbook written in desperation, but it remains a legal document of, immense power.
And that brings us right to our mission statement for this deep dive. If 1933 was about saving the dollar by confiscating gold, today's debt crisis suggests the government is, once again, desperate for assets. Let's put this current crisis in context. In 1933, U.S. federal debt was around 40% of GDP.
Right.
Today, we routinely exceed 120% of GDP. The scale of the modern financial emergency is exponentially larger.
The need is definitely greater, but the target might shift. So the central question we really have to investigate is, if they go shopping for assets again, why silver? Historically, silver was secondary. It was just, poor man's gold. It didn't carry that same systemic weight.
But the answer is fundamentally different in 2026. Silver has undergone this pivotal reclassification. It's no longer just money. It is now officially listed by the Department of Energy as a strategic critical mineral.
And that's the key phrase.
It's needed for the green grid, for the energy transition, and for military technology. It has moved from the vault to the vital supply chain.
So our investigation today is forensic. We're looking at the potential mechanisms of a modern state seizure, one that's custom designed for the digital age. We need to investigate two core threats. First, the specter of physical seizure, in Order 6102 Redux, but this time based on strategic necessity.
In a second.
The modern, and I would argue more effective method, the Windfall Profits Tax.
So we want to give you, the listener, the ultimate protection guide. How does one legally protect their physical silver assets in an age of digital surveillance and, frankly, desperate government spending? Let's dive in. We'll pull apart the legal and strategic evidence, starting right back in 1933.
All right, let's start with the evidence file, Executive Order 6102. To understand the current risk, we have to understand the historical blueprint. Let's look really closely at how the gold seizure actually worked.
The core action of 6102 wasn't arbitrary at all. It was meticulously targeted at the idea of hoarding. So it didn't target newly mined gold or, industrial gold used in dentistry or jewelry.
Right.
It specifically targeted the gold coin, bullion, and certificates held by private citizens as a store of wealth.
Their savings.
Their personal savings. The goal was to force liquidity into the struggling banking system and to give the Treasury reserves. And the context, the depth of the Great Depression is what gave them the justification. So the goal was twofold. First, save the collapsing banking system and the dollar. Second, it was a massive, forced transfer of assets from the private sector to the public treasury.
That's it. The government printed paper dollars. They exchanged them for physical gold at a set price.
What was it, $20?
$20.67 per ounce. And then, after the bulk of the gold was surrendered, they immediately revalued it to $35 per ounce. They locked in a colossal profit for the government, basically overnight.
That revaluation is so critical, isn't it? It was the ultimate governmental sleight of hand. They devalued the currency by almost 70% against gold, creating this massive paper profit that helped fund the New Deal programs.
But the legal framework, that's where the true power lies. The president didn't just invent this authority, he derived it from the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917.
Wait, hold on. The Trading with the Enemy Act. That sounds like wartime legislation. How did they possibly use a law designed to prevent commerce with hostile foreign nations to justify seizing the gold of American citizens?
It was an ingenious, if not a bit terrifying, legal maneuver. The act was originally intended to give the president authority over foreign property during wartime. But in 1933, FDR declared a national emergency due to the financial crisis. And critically, the Supreme Court later validated this broad interpretation in what were called the Gold Clause cases.
What do they say?
The ruling affirmed that during a recognized national emergency, the government could utilize emergency powers to secure assets necessary for national economic stabilization.
Including assets held by its own citizens.
Including assets held by its own citizens.
That's the chilling part. The underlying legislation, the precedent, it's fully intact, and it's based on the executive declaration of an emergency. So we connect the 1933 crisis, where debt was bad, but you could argue was manageable, to the current situation. I mean, we are running historic trillion-dollar deficits year after year. The motive for another seizure or securing of strategic assets is stronger than ever. The government's financial burdens are catastrophic.
And we shouldn't overlook the complexity of the current economy versus 1933. Back then, the U.S. economy was simpler. The debt, while severe, was contained. Today, the crisis is hyper-globalized, the obligations are staggering, and the financial instruments used to obscure the debt are infinitely more complex.
So when an emergency is declared today,
the government will move with the speed of electronic systems, not 1930s bureaucracy.
So the key takeaway from 1933 is not about gold or silver specifically, but about legal proof. The U.S. government has the established legal authority. It's been proven in the Supreme Court. And they have the historical template for criminalizing a widely held asset class when they deem it necessary for national stability or emergency purposes.
It's a roadmap.
And they've driven down it successfully once before.
That's exactly right. We know they can do it. So now we have to investigate why they might target silver specifically this time around, and why silver's risk profile might actually exceed gold's today.
Let's move on to Section 2, the strategic shift. So if the government were to enact an Order 6102 Redux today, they would need a powerful, easily defensible legal justification, one that goes beyond just, economic stability.
Exactly. In 1933, gold was targeted because it was purely money. It was the anchor of the system. Silver was secondary. Maybe it was used as coinage, but structurally it was secondary. Today, the transformation of silver is the pivotal difference. We have seen its role just explode far beyond currency.
This is so critical. Silver is now officially a critical material listed by the Department of Energy. And this reclassification is effectively a national security declaration. It pulls silver out of the realm of a mere monetary hedge.
And into the realm of strategic contraband.
That fundamentally changes the risk calculation for anyone holding a physical stack, doesn't it?
It does. Gold remains a monetary asset, a store of value. Silver, however, is now a national security asset, which makes it, ironically, potentially more vulnerable to nationalization than gold.
Okay, let's detail the specific industrial uses that justify this shift. You mentioned military applications, which, that provides the government with the most compelling legal justification you can imagine.
The sources confirm this necessity. You literally cannot build a modern Tomahawk missile, an advanced fighter jet, or a next-generation guidance system without silver.
Why is that? What does it do?
It's because of silver's unparalleled properties. It has the highest electrical and thermal conductivity of any known metal. So in mission-critical defense systems, where failure is not an option, you need that reliability. High-speed circuit boards, specialized batteries, reliable connectors, they all rely on silver to function in extreme environments, whether that's the deep sea or outer space.
So if the military supply chain runs dry...
the argument for requisitioning private stocks becomes immensely powerful.
But the demand doesn't stop with the military. The entire global push for the energy transition relies on this metal. We're talking about massive systemic demand for solar panels, the complex electronics in electric vehicles, and the backbone of the entire green grid infrastructure.
Consider the volume. Solar panels, specifically the photovoltaic cells, are major consumers of silver paste. The push for, say, 50% or 100% renewable energy penetration requires enormous amounts of solar infrastructure. That demands millions upon millions of ounces of silver annually.
And if a geopolitical crisis, say with major mining countries, disrupts that supply chain?
The government looks around and sees that private citizens collectively hold the largest non-government reserve in the world.
And this brings us to the key legal tool they would use today, which is far more direct than the Trading with the Enemy Act.
The Defense Production Act, the DPA.
Okay, tell us about the DPA.
The DPA, particularly Title III, grants the president sweeping legal authority. He can prioritize and secure critical supply chains and resources during a time of war, geopolitical crisis, or even a severe economic emergency related to national security. This isn't just about printing money. This allows the government to mandate production, to allocate materials away from non-essential users, and, critically,
Requisition property.
to requisition property deemed essential for national defense.
Wait a minute, though. If the DPA's mandate is national defense and preparedness, couldn't a private stacker argue that their physical coins aren't processed, usable feedstock? Doesn't the government have to prove an imminent need for the raw, unrefined metal?
That's a good challenge. But the DPA is incredibly broad. If the refiners and manufacturers who turn raw silver into usable components run out of feedstock, the entire chain halts. If a geopolitical conflict creates a scenario where new mining supply is cut off, the government would argue that any available source, including large private hoards, is functionally necessary inventory.
So they wouldn't send agents to your house?
No. They would nationalize the inventories held by large vaults, storage facilities, and potentially mandate that dealers track and report private inventory above a certain threshold.
So let's run the conflict scenario that justifies this action. If private stackers are collectively sitting on hundreds of millions of ounces of physical silver, and defense contractors like Lockheed Martin or major battery manufacturers are running low or running out,
the DPA kicks in. Under the DPA, the government is legally empowered to compel the sale of that inventory. They wouldn't necessarily call it confiscation in the 1933 sense.
what would they call it?
They would frame it as a compulsory purchase or nationalization for the greater good and national security. The legal argument is simple, powerful, and almost undeniable in court. The needs of the military, the energy grid, and critical infrastructure outweigh the individual right to hoard a critical resource during a time of national peril.
And this is the crucial connection back to you, the listener. Your stack of silver coins is no longer just a financial hedge against inflation. If the DPA is invoked, the government views it as necessary inventory for national defense and the survival of the green transition infrastructure. This dramatic shift from money to munitions ingredient is what increases its risk profile compared to gold. Gold is valuable, but silver is operationally necessary.
If the justification in 1933 was economic stabilization, the justification today is indisputable strategic necessity. A national security argument is a far more powerful and less debatable legal hammer for the state to wield.
That brings us to Section 3, where we've got to shift gears a bit. We've established the legal motive for taking silver. Now let's look at the method they would actually use. The traditional prepper fear physical confiscation, sending agents to raid every basement. That seems unlikely.
It's operationally inefficient. It's too hard and messy. I mean, just think about the logistical nightmare. Millions of warrants, potential violence, dealing with individual storage locations, smelting and storing scattered ounces. The government seeks solutions that leverage existing financial controls, not brute force.
So the modern approach, the more insidious method we're calling soft confiscation, is achieved through the Windfall Profits Tax, the preferred tool of a technologically advanced state.
Absolutely. The mechanism of the Windfall Profits Tax, or WPT, is elegant from a governmental perspective. It preserves the illusion that you still own the physical metal.
You keep the coins.
You keep the coins. But simultaneously, the government destroys its value proposition and liquidity by stealing the gain. They don't need the coin, they just need the proceeds.
Okay, let's detail the scenario. Let's slow down the math so you, the listener, can really visualize the financial impact of this. Imagine silver, driven by crisis and industrial demand, hits $200 an ounce. This is your day. You're finally ready to realize your gains.
And at that peak moment, a law is passed. It claims that because silver is a critical strategic asset, the massive price increase is deemed an excessive gain on a necessary national resource. Therefore, any profit over a set threshold, and let's be generous and say $50 profit per ounce, is taxed at an extreme punitive rate.
Like what?
Perhaps 80% or higher.
80%. Okay, so if you bought at $30 and it hits $200, your total profit is $170. If the tax is applied to anything over $50 of profit, that means $120 of your gain is subject to that 80% tax rate.
Right.
That means a staggering $96 of that 120 is immediately siphoned off by the government.
And let's just trace what's left for you. You started with a $170 profit. $96 goes to the tax. That leaves you with $74, plus your original $30 cost basis. Your effective sale price is $104 an ounce, even though the market price is $200.
So the government has just captured 80% of the market excitement and left you with only marginally more than half of the true value.
Yes.
And this isn't some fantasy. We have a crucial historical parallel from the 1970s. This exact tax mechanism, the Windfall Profits Tax, was used against oil companies during the energy crisis.
It was. It was implemented specifically in 1980 by President Carter and signed by Reagan to capture what was perceived as excessive profits gained by domestic oil producers after deregulation led to soaring prices. The political justification was that these profits were unearned windfalls derived from the crisis, not from legitimate innovation or effort.
And that set the precedent.
It set a critical legal precedent that the government can impose extraordinary commodity-specific taxes on strategic resources when prices spike during an economic or geopolitical emergency.
That's the specific receipt they will pull out of the drawer when the silver price goes vertical. The effect of this tax is just devastating to the asset's utility. It creates a complete breakdown in the legal market.
It creates a dual price system. There's the true market price, which reflects industrial demand, which might be $200. But then there's the government-sanctioned post-tax price, which, after the deduction, nets you maybe $100. They don't physically take the metal. They successfully destroy the true market gain and the monetization value. Any effort to sell legally becomes, well, worthless.
But how do they enforce this? If I walk into a local coin shop and sell them 100 ounces, is the dealer supposed to do the calculation?
Yes, precisely. The enforcement detail is what seals the deal. If you, the stacker, attempt to sell through any legal or recognized bullion dealer, which is necessary for legitimate large-scale transactions above cash limits, the dealer is mandated by law to act as the withholding agent. The tax is automatically calculated and deducted at the point of exchange before the net funds are dispersed.
So the dealer becomes an unpaid, highly compliant tax collector.
Exactly, making it nearly impossible to legally access the full market value.
So the threat shifts entirely. It's no longer the threat of physical loss. It's the certainty of financial elimination through the tax infrastructure.
And now we move to the final piece of this modern confiscation puzzle, the enforcement grid. Because even the Windfall Profits Tax only works if the government can track and control the transaction. If I sell my silver for cash under the table, the WPT means nothing.
Exactly. We have to remember the flaw in the 1933 confiscation. Despite the draconian penalties, the existence of a robust, untracked cash economy allowed for a black market to flourish. You could sell your gold to a local jeweler or your neighbor for cash, and that transaction was invisible to the state. The level of compliance was never 100%.
That loophole, the privacy of cash, is the difference between partial compliance and total financial control. And that loophole is precisely what the ultimate enforcement tool of the 2026 era is designed to close. Central bank digital currencies.
CBDCs.
CBDCs.
The CBDC reality is the ultimate game changer. If physical cash is banned or heavily restricted or just phased out, a scenario we see actively being explored across the G7 nations, the digital dollar becomes mandatory for commerce. And if every transaction uses the digital dollar, then every transaction is tracked, traceable, and centralized onto a single ledger controlled by the central bank.
The privacy of 1933 vanishes completely.
What's fascinating here is how the enforcement will be automated. We are moving toward a world where the IRS and other government agencies use AI surveillance tools that act as a perpetual, instantaneous auditor.
This AI won't need warrants or paperwork. It will simply flag anomalies. Let's trace the tracking mechanism in our $200 silver scenario.
Okay, let's say you manage to find a private buyer. Someone willing to pay you $20,000 for 100 ounces of silver, circumventing the legal dealer network. They pay you directly using a peer-to-peer transfer via their new mandatory digital wallet.
That influx immediately hits the centralized ledger. The IRS AI is programmed to recognize the pattern, a large, one-time deposit from an unrelated party into your account. The transaction metadata will immediately trigger an alert demanding source of funds, compliance with strategic asset tax required.
And this isn't just about income tax.
No, it's about compliance with the specific punitive windfall profits tax on strategic metals.
And the consequence, unlike 1933, is immediate and financially punitive. The government doesn't need to arrest you.
They don't. If you cannot provide instant, verifiable digital proof that the windfall tax was calculated and paid on that specific $20,000 deposit, either because you tried to circumvent the legal dealer or because you did a private sale, the digital funds are frozen.
Frozen. Immediately.
Immediately. That lack of access is the punishment. It's a financial chokehold. The CBDC effectively creates a digital fence around your physical assets. You can still own the coins, they can be physically in your backyard, but you cannot safely monetize them or introduce their value into the traceable economy without the government's permission and tax compliance.
This digital net is the real power play. It completely destroys the liquidity of any large-scale black market sale. If you manage to sell $100,000 worth of silver under the table for digital currency and those funds are immediately locked, you've gained nothing but a legal headache.
They solved the 1933 enforcement flaw with 21st century centralized surveillance technology.
The only way around this digital fence is pure, untraceable barter for physical goods and services.
Which severely limits the utility of your savings for any large financial transactions, like buying real estate or a business.
This forensic investigation paints a bleak, but I think ultimately realistic picture of the modern threat landscape. But history teaches us that the smart money always finds an exit, or at least a highly protected corner of the market. When the rules change, the strategy has to change too. We need to look at the playbook for opting out, or, more accurately, opting into protected asset classes.
The historical loophole is always the best place to start when you're building a defense strategy against future overreach. So we revisit the specific exemption in Order 6102 that gave wealthy holders a critical out, the exclusion of rare and unusual coins.
That is the key insight we take from 1933. While the masses were forced to turn in generic gold bullion, the wealthy and the informed held on to pre-1933 collectibles. Double eagles, numismatic coins whose value was derived from scarcity and history, not melt weight.
Exactly. They were not viewed as monetary instruments or hoarded wealth. They were viewed as collectibles and therefore exempt from seizure.
So this leads directly to our first and perhaps most resilient defense strategy for the modern silver stacker: numismatics.
The action here is simple but crucial. Hold a substantial portion of the stack in historical, certified, or collectible coins. Move aggressively away from generic 1-ounce bars or bullion rounds that clearly fall under the definition of strategic metal feedstock.
And why is that distinction so powerful?
Because numismatic coins like certified Morgan silver dollars, ancient Roman silver coins, or high-grade American silver eagles from specific rare years are much harder to classify under Strategic Bullion or Critical Mineral Act. Their primary value is derived from rarity, condition, and collectability, not melt value for a Tomahawk missile guidance system.
The government is interested in industrial feedstock, not rare art.
And that differentiation is a legal shield. If the government passes a windfall profits tax on strategic silver bullion, numismatic coins have a very strong legal argument for exemption, just as they did in 1933, because their value is already proven to be non-commodity based.
Okay, strategy 2 addresses the CBDC net directly: private transactions and barter. We've established that the digital fence makes monetizing through legal channels almost pointless.
Therefore, the action here has to be proactive. You have to establish trusted relationships with private buyers, barter networks, or trusted trade partners now, before a potential CBDC grid makes such transactions difficult or outright criminalized.
Barter remains the ultimate untraceable loophole.
It does. If you exchange silver for a tangible asset, land, specialized equipment, livestock, critical supplies, you circumvent the need for the digital currency entirely. You remove the transaction from the jurisdiction of the IRS AI. It's a difficult strategy for scale, it requires organization and pre-planning, but it retains the metal's full utility in a financial emergency.
And finally, we have defense strategy 3, offshore storage, or jurisdiction diversification. The threat of the Defense Production Act and domestic tax overreach is bound by U.S. borders.
So the action is to store a meaningful portion of the metal in stable foreign jurisdictions. We're talking about established vaults in places like Singapore, Switzerland, or the Cayman Islands. This isn't about hiding the assets from the IRS, you still have to declare them, but about protecting them from physical seizure or immediate taxation mandates.
The rationale here is legal and geopolitical. These foreign jurisdictions do not fall under the direct enforcement power of the U.S. Defense Production Act. They are not directly subject to a U.S. executive order or a sudden domestic tax law in the same way.
It provides geographical diversification. It acts as insurance should the U.S. government decide to slam down the hammer on domestic holders and domestic vaults. It ensures not all your eggs are in the same geopolitical basket, creating a time delay and a legal headache for any attempted seizure.
This strategy recognizes that government desperation often manifests first domestically. Having assets outside the primary jurisdiction provides not just security, but optionality when crisis hits. So we've reached the forensic conclusion of this deep dive. The evidence is compelling, drawn from history and future technology. We've established the three legs of the modern confiscation stool.
Leg 1, the precedent, Order 6102, exists. Leg 2, the industrial motive, the strategic mineral status for military and energy infrastructure is incredibly compelling. And Leg 3, the enforcement mechanism, the CBUCC, combined with the windfall tax, is far more advanced and effective than anything FDR had in 1933.
It's a perfect storm.
It is.
The government has the need, the established legal authority, and the digital tools to enforce compliance without the need for physical confrontation. They don't need to break down your door. They just need to turn off the digital faucet.
Which brings us back to the foundational prepper dilemma, the core question that every stacker ponders when securing their wealth. Is burying silver in the backyard still viable?
This is the iconic image, right? The traditional prepper approach, the garden gnome hiding the treasure chest. Does it still work against the threats we've just investigated?
Well, the strategy solves one major problem beautifully. Physical theft by burglars or opportunistic thieves. If you bury the chest deep and keep quiet about it, it's secure from your typical home invasion. But how does it fare against the modern systemic threats?
It fails. Crucially, on two critical fronts. First, physical retrieval and detection. While the likelihood of a specific government agency dedicating a drone or ground-penetrating radar just to find your private stash might be low, the technology exists.
Right.
Drones, advanced heat signatures, high-resolution satellite imagery, when deployed systemically, they make the idea of the perfectly untraceable stash technologically obsolete in the long run.
But the existential failure is the CBDC net. Even if you manage to physically retrieve the asset, you now have the problem of monetization.
Exactly. You may still hold the coins, but you cannot sell them for any large amount of digital currency without triggering that IRS AI alert and the automatic windfall tax deduction. The asset is, for all intents and purposes, illiquid wealth within the formal economy.
You are left with a heavy pile of metal that can only be used in a highly restricted, dangerous black market barter system, which severely limits the metal's utility as a large-scale store of value.
So the traditional defensive burial is strong against old threats, but fatally weak against the modern systemic threats of digital control and financial taxation.
It protects against burglary, but not against the state.
The investigation concludes with this warning. The rules can change rapidly and without notice when the government is desperate and the geopolitical environment is unstable. Prepare your stack not just for the price rise, but for the inevitable tax grab.
Because the old adage has a necessary modern twist, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. That still holds true for protecting against banks and paper claims.
But the modern reality is this. Even if you hold it, they can still tax it.
And we leave you with a profound challenge. The government has convinced itself that your private silver stack is necessary for the greater good for missiles, for the energy grid. So if the U.S. military needs your silver for national defense, is handing it over patriotic, or is forcing you to sell it below market value via an extreme tax, simply state-sanctioned theft?
That's something for you to mull over as you secure your assets. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.